Okay, bonjour à tous et à toutes. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Merian Center for Advanced Studies in the Maghreb, in short, MECAM, I warmly welcome you all to our event today, focusing on the dynamics of electoral politics in Turkey this May 2023. And we are very delighted to have with us today esteemed experts. Karadag from the University of Brême and Hakkı Taş from the GIGA Institute in Hamburg, who will be our speakers. Building upon the outcomes of the parliamentary elections and the first round of the presidential elections on May 14th, Karadag and Hakkı Taş will present the insights on the distinct features of competitive authoritarianism in Turkey. They will delve into the role of institutional advantages for ruling elites in electoral environments and shed light on the strategies employed by opposition parties and activists to contest these advantages. Lastly, they will address the implications of these findings for Turkey's position in contemporary politics in the Middle East and North Africa. Hakkı Taş is a research fellow at the GIGA, the German Institute of Global and Area Studies in Hamburg, Germany, and his research interests encompass populism, diasporas, political Islam, and identity politics, with a particular focus on Turkey and Egypt. Karadag is a research fellow at the Institute of Intercultural and International Studies at the University of Brême. And before joining this institute in 2011, he was a doctoral candidate and postdoc at the Max Planck Institute for the Study of Societies in Cologne. And his research encompassed political development in Turkey and the Middle East, as well as the history of the welfare state and social policy in Africa. And who do we are, for those who don't know us, the MECAM yet? Established in 2020, the Merian Center for Advanced Studies in the Maghreb serves as a platform for regional and international scholarly exchange in Tunisia, with a central or guiding theme of imagining futures dealing with disparity. And located at the University of Tunis, our research focuses on the impacts of multidimensional inequality on models, visions, and ideas for the future. Now, and without further ado, let's begin with our event, with insightful presentations of Roy and Hakkı. And thank you all for your presence and your hopefully active participation afterwards. Thank you. So I think Hakkı will take over. Oh, okay. Hakkı will take over. So Hakkı, please, the stage is yours.
Thanks a lot, Julius. Thanks a lot to MECAM and you for hosting me and us. I'll do the introduction first, and then we'll jump to the presentations, to the talks. Well, I don't know how much crowd we have over Facebook, but since you are here, I assume you have not been yet fed up with Turkey experts and Turkey debates. All over the world, there are dozens of events to discuss Turkey's 2023 general and presidential elections. So welcome our session. Hoş geldiniz, ahlan. Well, in the last 2 decades, people in Turkey considered each election actually a life and death issue. That's not very specific to this last one. If you remember 2007, it was... Sorry, Roy, were you saying something?
No, these are just chair sounds of people.
Okay, that's great. Okay, if you remember 2007, the general elections, the presidential elections as well, the Republican allies were dominating the scene. For many Kemalists, it was about Sharia versus secularism. And then the 2011 elections that came right after the constitutional referendum. For many AKP supporters, it was the advent of New Turkey. Then 2000 2014 local elections and 2015 elections under the shadow of the Gezi protests, in which the AKP Erdogan declared an independence war against Western imperials and their puppets in Turkey. And then 2018 elections that came right after the referendum that sealed Turkey's transition to hyper-presidential system. And now, again, another life and death issue, 2023 elections. For the opposition, it is the last chance. It is actually the last chance to restore Kemalism and making Turkey ehişte again. I mean, restoring Turkey from hybrid authoritarianism to hybrid democracy. And for the government, it is another, again, a survival issue for Turkey, whether Turkey will hand the country to terrorists and their collaborators or prosper as a new Turkey. Well, this electoral vigilantism manifested itself in voter turnout. According to the Supreme Election Council, YSK, it is around 89%, which is high. Actually, it is the highest during the AKP era, I mean, since 2002. So it's really high. If you still have not muted your Turkish friends over Twitter, I mean, you may have come across a lot of stories of Turks living abroad, driving hundreds of kilometers just to go and to vote, and it's all on their pocket. Costs for some people, it even costed like $2,000, etc. People wait hours in line, spends their weekends waiting for their turn in the ballot stations. With that high level of electoral mobilization and with high expectations, especially on the side of the opposition, we have also seen some incidents of suicide, especially among the frustrated young people who had the idea that everything was over, that was the last election, nothing will get fixed after more. And after the election night, the day after the election night, the word intihar, I mean the Turkish word for suicide, was peaked actually in Google searches, actually. That all shows how much Turks, Kurds, people in Turkey attribute significance to the 2023 elections. And the expectations, the calculations before the elections, I mean, as the exiled Turkish journalist Can Dudas said, I mean, AKP came to power after an economic crisis and 1999 earthquake. Now it will relinquish power following another economic downturn and the earthquakes. And many polls actually showed Kılıçdaroğlu with a significant lead, but it wasn't only about the pollsters, also the financial markets. I mean, so Kılıçdaroğlu's presidency, a high possibility. Turkey's debt risk estimates decreased significantly before the elections, and after the outcome of the first round announced, they rose up again. And at the end of the first round, Erdogan came out the clear leader on election night with 49.5% of the vote, just shy of what he needed to avoid a runoff. And since no one passed 50%, there will be a second tour. After 20 years in power, Erdogan might get 5 more years to rule, if not more. And by that, he will surpass any other Turkish leader since late 19th century Ottoman Sultan Abdülhamit II, as one of the observers stated. Now we have many questions. What happened? How happened? And what's going to happen? Roy and I going to reflect on these elections. We'll first have 10 to 15 minutes each to speak about it, and then we will discuss our presentations, and then the floor will be open for Q&A section. Roy, it's your turn now.
Thank you, Hakkı. Thank you, people in Tunis. Thank you, people via Zoom in Germany and from wherever you are participating here. I have a short follow-up on the way on Hakkı, on the way we talk about the first round of the presidential elections and the parliamentary elections. And you may have come across several new big debates. There may be only Twitter debates, but people are, I don't know, it triggered something. And there are questions surrounding like, Okay, so how could people actually underestimate Erdogan in the during you know, the election reporting ahead of the first round? There's an obvious liberal bias in global news and especially Western news reporting on Turkish elections, in particular in Germany as well. And this liberal bias comes with a lot of political judgments on these elections, its fate, and where Turkey is headed afterwards. And Yavuz Baydar and others were really offensive against liberal commentators and journalists, and saying, well, how could you present this as a clear case for the opposition and for Kılıçdaroğlu? So now there's a lot of self-reflection going on, but also people countering Yavuz Baydar, saying, well, I mean, it is tricky. It is not a democratic context where you can obviously fully rely on these surveys ahead of the first round. And then, you know, there are other debates. I mean, so the usual ones is, what does this mean for the future of politics? And I don't know. So in many of the there are many ways of writing history of these elections. And the question now is, okay, so which specific historical dynamic unfolded and presented itself to us observers in 2023 with this specific decision and this specific type of voting of Turks in Turkey and Turks abroad? Hakkı already referred to that. There is a lot of hopelessness and despair among the opposition, not only among the Kemalist nationalist opposition, but much more among the liberal, Kurdish and progressive parts of the opposition, who observe and who perceive this as a full unfolding of fascist rule in Turkey. And I mean, we can ask ourselves what this means when you can win no elections at all under the given system, in a context where elections seem to matter. You may go to slide number 2. And before making such drastic judgments on how wrong everybody was in the weeks before the election, one should not forget that, I mean, in terms of elections, these are quite weird and crazy temporalities. You know, 1 week things count, which a couple of days later look crazy, or you know, where people seem to think, well, how could we have thought that? And all the assumptions may be gone. And in such temporalities linked to elections, it is easy to forget how things really were only 6 weeks ago. Now, the current interpretation after the first round of the presidential elections and with the results of the parliamentary elections is that there was obviously no danger to the rule of Erdogan, no danger to his style of governing and his way of ordering institutions and using power, political, legal, and illegal. So the brief story I want to tell here is that there were challenges. Erdogan's rule was threatened in the weeks and months ahead of the election, but these were very specific challenges, and we will see how Erdogan and his ruling elites, obviously, from hindsight, obviously responded also very specifically to these specific challenges. And the most important challenge was that with the local elections of 2019, and especially with the Istanbul elections of 2019, it became clear to everybody, if the opposition unites, and I mean now nationalist and Kurdish opposition, if it unites, then Erdogan will obviously have no majority left and he will be out of power. So this is 4 years ago, and obviously the ruling elites had a lot of time to prepare so that this will never happen again. Then there's also the story of the massive economic crisis that Turkey has been going through these past, well, 5 to 6 to 7 years now. In recent years, not just because of Corona, there's an inflation crisis, living costs really went up. And even on the corporate side, you know, firms are having a tough time. Corporate debt is as high as it was never before, and even like in the in economic circles, there is no certainty and no clarity of what kind of policy Erdogan and the AKP will put forth to solve any of the economic problems of the country. And most critically, of course, was the devastating February earthquake, which killed more than 50,000 people, and which made people remember how the devastating earthquake of Izmit in 1999 was such a symbolic rupture in that it delegitimized in the years to come, because the years to come back then were also packed with economic crisis, financial crisis, inflation, etc. And for many people back then, okay, this earthquake shatters whatever legitimacy the ruling parties back then had, and people assumed that, well, why should not something similar happen today, especially given that now only one party was responsible for all the granting all the illegal building permits in these areas, whereas back then it was, you know, 4 to 6 parties responsible for that. But now, you know, given that Erdogan assumed that monopolized all that power, how could he blame somebody else for what is happening in the country? And there was, in these past years and months, growing disillusionment with Erdogan and the AK Party. You can see how support rates for the government declined. This has not only to do with the Syrian refugees, but there was an extra discourse around these Syrian refugees and what they cost and how they don't integrate themselves and how that money should be used to support the lives of Turks, etc. And the falling support rates were across the conservative and Kemalist and nationalist and religious camps. With the liberals, obviously, but even with the others, life has become so hard that, yes, people did blame the government. And then with regards to foreign and regional policy, yes, Turkey is much more powerful than many other Arab countries in the neighborhood, but most of its regional policy goals that it articulated these past 10 years did not materialize. Yes, the Turkish army is in northern Syria and will not, obviously not retreat from there, but in the confrontations with Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates and the others, all the stabilizing countries and status quo countries in the region, Turkey could achieve nothing of what it hoped it could achieve 10 years ago. Yes, next, please. So the question is, given these concrete challenges to how the AK Party and Erdogan rules, what could you do then to prevent these dangers unfolding as concrete threat of losing the 23 elections? I mean, so there's the usual polarization in Turkish society. There's the usual polarization among the Turkish opposition, and then there is the kind of polarization used by Erdogan to deepen this fragmentation of the political opposition. And this opposition usually is an opposition one made of Kemalist nationalists, some Kemalist liberals, and Kurdish progressive, but also Kurdish conservatives. And again, concretely, if the opposition unity was the main challenge and threat of the 2019 elections, and that was already an enormous accomplishment back then, well, what can one do to deepen this oppositional polarization to prevent a similarly unified scene? There you have the Kurdish question, which is being used by the AK Party. The AK Party usually alleges that the Kemalists in the opposition play with the, or go along with what the HDP wants, meaning they go along with what the PKK wants. And usually this is done to weaken the Kurdish position in the opposition and to induce Kılıçdaroğlu and the others to become more nationalist, Kemalist, so that the Kurdish vote will not go into this camp. But the HDP did play along. Even now, the HDP is, with all the openly racist slogans that Kılıçdaroğlu now applies, even now the HDP is mobilizing its supporters to support him because it knows what kind of political game it is. So attacking the Kurdish side in that unity did not work out. What did work out was that the AK Party made sure that the opposition would not put Ekrem İmamoğlu, the mayor of Istanbul, who won in 2019, to run as president. It used a very banal and shady move, opening or threatening to open legal proceedings against İmamoğlu because of Präsidentenbeleidigung, because of insulting the president. So the opposition knew as soon as if they had chosen to give İmamoğlu the opportunity to run in these elections, then proceedings would have opened, there would have been a case and maybe even already a sentence, and then it would have been clear that he could not run. So they had to choose for the second or third best option with Kılıçdaroğlu, and this in itself may have already cost the opposition, I don't know, let it be 2 to 3 to 4% of the vote or so. So people then say, well, do not fall into this polarizing strategy of the AK Party, but there is a contradiction here that is obvious. I mean, there is a deep rift, and sometimes cooperation and unity of the opposition cannot mend this rift that has been historically very stable in modern Turkish politics. And to make that more concretely, there was a time when the opposition scene was much more easy to let's say, to unify. 10 years ago, you had the ruling AK Party, and in the opposition, you had the Republican People's Party, CHP, and you had the Kurdish party, HDP. So usually you would have the two coalesce and get rid of the big one. But back then, unfortunately, CHP and the others went along in criminalizing the HDP after 2015. So what we have after 2015, and especially after 2018, is much more fragmentation on the opposition side, but also much more fragmentation on the governing side. There are many more far-right and hardcore Kemalist nationalist parties now around, so that now the choice to unify your votes is not as easy as it would have been 10 years ago. So had the CHP not gone along with the AK Party and criminalizing the HDP, maybe it could have prevented this fragmentation, and cooperation now would look much easier. So this fragmentation of opposition and pro-government parties also means that the president is now very flexible in mobilizing alliances, right? So he can choose to work with this figure that may have 5 to 6% or so, or not, right? He may be able to play them against each other. And then within the opposition camp, there are now many people who 10 years ago, 15 years ago were with Erdogan or Erdogan's party, Davutoglu and the others. But these were not threatening. I mean, these are old defections, right? These are not new defections. What you would need now to become threatening to Erdogan would be if defections of powerful actors right now, and not of formally established religious conservatives who cannot mobilize any votes. The issue of repression, etc., is quite stable. So you have regular and sometimes also mass imprisonments of journalists and activists, which is an enormous burden for the opposition. All the political prisoners are a burden on the opposition, because of course you would hope that, well, at least you would do something to get them free, but then you will not have enough energy to mobilize for democratizing the whole system. And then it seems that this party and this state machinery that you mobilize in times of election propaganda is as powerful as it has never been before. I mean, there is an almost bureaucratic monopoly on jobs, on other forms of other resources of patronage, etc., that only the AK Party can mobilize and not the others. And then you have the obvious pro-AK Party monopoly in TV news, which means that none of the others will be as visible as Erdogan in TV. And for most conservatives in Turkey, TV is still the main medium to where they get their news and where they inform themselves or so. So what does this mean after the 2023 elections? It seems now as if Erdogan's autocratic rule is quite stable, given that it managed to overcome all these concrete challenges after 2019. It seems that parliament, judiciary, and media still function in a non-democratic fashion if ordered like that from above. There's an unbroken Turkish nationalism and Muslim conservatism that fuses. There are many actors and organizations now selling this religious nationalism in Turkey, but it is more dominant than any other ideology out there. And again, Erdogan and the AK Party seem to have limitless bureaucratic patronage resources, which means that the stakes of elections are very high for everybody in the bureaucracy or so. So why would you risk, having some other one in power when at this stage it is your state, or this state belongs to somebody with whom you are attached to and which offers you good enough jobs and career opportunities or so. The tricky thing, of course, is it is all centered on Erdogan with the fragmentation of the opposition camp, but also of the pro-government camp. There are now many elites, many figures who want to inherit him at some point, but of course Erdogan, I mean, if he stays healthy, I mean, he doesn't look good, but if he stays healthy, then he may still have a couple of years to let the energy of most of these people run off. But the question remains, I mean, without Erdogan, there's obviously no continuity of this figuration, and afterwards things will collapse. And it may also be this exact image of things collapsing after him, which may induce people to give him their vote, because he may, of course, at least guarantee some sort of stability and order, however spurious it may seem. Thank you very much, and I guess we continue with Hakkı now.
Thank you. My talk would not be as structured, systematic as Roy's. I'll mostly will open up some of the points Roy raised. I mean, during the MA and PhD, and we have many academic members among the audience. We have this course, Comparative Politics, and the full topic in Comparative Politics is democracy, theories of democracy. It all starts with the multiple definitions of democracy. And all the definitions start with Schumpeter, the late Austrian political scientist and politician who had to migrate from Germany to the United States in 1939 for obvious reasons. And Schumpeter has the minimalist definition of democracy. I mean, for him, democracy is the method by which people elect representatives in competitive elections to carry out their will. So his definition is quite minimalist and usually criticized for electoralism. So because for Schumpeter, democracy is reduced to elections. But now, as I age, I came to realize that free and fair elections, competitive elections, is already quite a high standard to call any regime as a democracy. So it is a very important standard that could define elections. Free and fair elections is currently what we miss in many countries across the world as we go through the third wave of de-democratization, or the reverse wave of democratization. And that the elections in general leave us with the question how to categorize Turkey. What is Turkey now? I mean, that question, we had it before the elections, and now with the heat of the elections, we are asking that more frequently. I mean, the old Turkey, the Kemalist Turkey, we used to call it a hybrid democracy, not definitely a Western liberal, following Western liberal standards, but still a functioning democracy with reliable elections, right? And following Adam Shorsky, you could call definitely Turkey as a tutelary democracy in which the military had the ultimate power, intervening even what elective courses are to be taught in the secondary classes. We had the discussion whether it is the general will or the general's will. Remember all the discussions about the Kemalist Turkey? That was tutelary democracy. And then when the military, the establishment and its power was neutralized after the Ergenekon and sledgehammer trials and several EU-induced reforms in that regard, Turkey entered what I would call delegative democracy, at least since 2011. What is a delegative democracy? It is still a democracy. It has some reliable elections still, but delegative democracy, while it has this vertical accountability, the elections, it lacks horizontal accountability. I mean, the checks and balances among the multiple institutions of the regime and government. Of course, I mean, that paper, I wrote it in 2014. It was published in early 2015. I mean, the paper was written and out before the 2015 elections and its runoff in November. And then our colleagues back Esen and Şebnem Gümüşçü wrote in late 2015, I mean after the 2015 elections, and categorized Turkey as a competitive authoritarianism. And it is now the default understanding, I mean, the main categorization of Turkey to which many scholars follow. And in competitive authoritarianism, I mean, it is not like electoral authoritarianism in which you have sham elections. Elections are held in competitive authoritarianism. They have meanings. Institutions of democracy, they still have meanings. Although incumbents can routinely manipulate formal democratic rules, they are unable to eliminate them or reduce them to a mere facade, okay? But that paper was also written before the coup attempt, what came after that. And Turkey got increasingly authoritarian after the coup attempt, and it makes quite difficult, even now, and actually quite for some time, to call Turkey even competitive authoritarianism. I would call Turkey rather a contentious autocracy at the moment. By saying that, I have two observations. First, competitive authoritarianism is not a regime type. I mean, when you classify regimes, competitive authoritarianism is not a regime. It is more like a phase. Eventually, competitive authoritarianism will tilt toward one end or another, either democratic or more authoritarian, but it is more like a phase that provided some lenses to understand these hybrid or diminished authoritarian regimes in this reverse wave of democratization we are going through. And Turkey's competitive authoritarianism is gradually tilting towards more autocratic fashion. Why I said, I mean, why autocracy, that's clear. Why I said contentious rather than competitive. First, when you call it competitive, it still some kind legitimizes the regime as being pseudo-democratic. I say contentious because contentiousness and competition are two different things. Contentiousness is only one element of political competition. In order to call an election as competition, okay, there are some other elements. What are these? First of all, electoral vulnerability. I mean, if the incumbent is safe in its tenure or it can abdicate the power. That is one condition. Another condition is availability. I mean, electoral elasticity to change party preferences. Another condition is decidability. I mean, different parties communicating their clearly distinguishable offers to the electorate, if they can do that. Okay, so in order to call an election as a competition, even without adjectives, you have to fulfill this criteria. Otherwise, contentiousness that there are multiple and genuine rival groups run against each other, that's only one element. And in Turkish elections, we see high level of contentiousness, not only in these elections, but also in the previous 2018 elections. But the other criteria are not fulfilled really to that great extent. I'm not inserting contentious autocracy as a great invention. As I said, we are talking about phenomena that are happening. I mean, at the moment, we see several movements towards autocratization in many countries, and probably will come up with different categories. But as the process continues, I think we should find new concepts that would define, identify what is going on in Turkey better. Elections are very important, of course. I mean, any authoritarian regime in any form. I mean, Erdogan does not have oil, natural resources, so he does not have limitless resources to make its electorate happy. He does not have this religious charisma of imams in Iran or somewhere else. At least not 50% of the society. He does not have that. So he needs elections for legitimacy. So elections should be seen as free and fair. At least they should have that pretense. But this does not negate a lot of conditions working against such a condition. Ferit Zakaria said recently that Erdogan's Turkey is the next innovation in illiberal democracy. He was talking about the accumulation of free but not fair elections across the world. I think that's, if it is an innovation, that's not a very new innovation. At least 2018 elections, I mean, even past 5 years ago, Erdogan repeated the same game here. We can talk about fraud, but the whole game in the election setup is already unfair. Erdogan set the game, determined the date, altered the rules, orchestrated the media, outmaneuvered his rivals, and ultimately he has won. Roy has already mentioned, that's why I'm going to try to allocate a less space in this talk about this unfair, uneven playing field. Imagine a country in which Erdogan, I mean, the leader controls already 90% of the media. It is effectively under state control, directly or indirectly. The leader has penetrated in the last 2 decades through all the positions, all the authorities across the state bodies, used the post-coup trauma and the emergency decrees to penetrate through various bodies in the state and in the media. Especially in the media, as Roy mentioned, I mean, one example, in this election, from 1st April to election day, I mean, in the TRT, in the official television broadcasting company, Erdogan got 48 hours of live broadcast. Bahçeli, his ally, got 28 hours. And then the leader, the opposition leader, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, got 32 minutes. So that is the discrepancy we are talking about. And when we look at the general society, the context, I mean, until very recently, Turkey was cited for having the largest number of imprisoned journalists in the world, which made Turkey like an open prison house, by which I'm talking exact numbers. I mean, Roy mentioned Article 299, the law against insulting the president. Just in the last 4 years, I'm not talking about the Gezi protest era. I'm not talking about the era of the when the coup attempt was suppressed. From 2018 to 2022, 127,000 investigations were opened just based on this article to protect the president. okay, in 4 years. And some of these people were even aged between 12 and 14. And when I said the country is like an open prison, AKP in its power actually built 270 new prisons, but even that was still not enough. When AKP came to power in 2002, there were 60,000 people incarcerated. Now it's over 340,000 people, and it is one of the highest rates over the world. And now we have this Silivri Soğuktur. Silivri is the name of the prison where most political prisoners are being hosted. Silivri is Soğuktur. Silivri is cold now, is now a joke matter. Whenever someone posts something critical of the Erdogan or the government, many people post their comments as that level. So it's widely accepted. In social media, there is high level of pressure. When you look at the state, you see that many authorities, many posts are filled not by AKP members, by those who show their personal loyalty to Erdogan. For instance, Metin Yener is the head of Sayıştay, the Court of Cassation. His brother Ahmet Yener is the head of the YSK, Supreme Election Council. They're all either Imam Hatip graduates or they share the same hometown with Erdogan. So a very personal loyalty is operating in the design of the state bodies. And of course, with that level of state penetration, Erdogan always starts the elections with a big head start. All the ideological and repressive state apparatuses, from state media to police forces, are at his disposal without proper checks and balances. All officials responsible for running or monitoring the elections, gained or held onto their posts due to their loyalty to the government. And you see the examples of wide social assistance programs, or with regard to this electoral economy, with regard to this last elections, you see, for instance, the introduction of the new retirement system. So this is the context in which the oppositional voices are suppressed heavily, and the government enjoys all the benefits and spoils of being in power. That is the context. Then when it comes to the rules, the government changed the rules of the game just before the game, but just before the election several times. For instance, in the 2018 elections, remember, the changes to the electoral law allowed the formation of the electoral alliances. It allowed the acceptance of unsealed ballots as valid, which was widely interpreted as a move to legalize electoral fraud. In these elections, there were changes to the electoral law in 2022. One of the changes, for among many others, is that usually the head of the electoral committees at this district and city level had to be senior judges. I mean, those promoted before AKP came to power. Now they allowed younger judges to be heading to leading electoral committees, and most of them, of course, were appointed by the time of the AKP. Setting the context, then changing the rules, and even setting the rivals. In the former elections, Erdogan ran early elections, if you remember, just to eliminate the candidacy of Abdullah Gül, put several legal restraints to eliminate Meral Akşener's presidential candidacy. Demirtas has always been kept behind on trumped-up charges of terrorism. Now, in this election, Demirtas is again behind the jails. And now, as Roy mentioned, Ekrem İmamoğlu was also accused of calling the ones who canceled the Istanbul elections as fools. And the trial is pending. And probably after the elections, there will be a consequence to that too. Setting this context, setting the rules of the game, setting the rivals. And when it comes to the campaign, you see the party bureaus from CHP, the Good Party, HDP, they were attacked and raided, mobbed. In Erzurum, the members, Kılıçdaroğlu, Ekrem İmamoğlu faced a mob attack, they were stoned. During the campaign, Kılıçdaroğlu and İmamoğlu even wore bulletproof vests before the vote. And at the day of the election, we see several examples of voter intimidation, scaring of opposition ballot box observers, stalling the process of electoral counting. The Spanish observers, electoral observers, were deported on the day of the election. And of course, the manipulation of the ballot box observers through the official news agency, AA, its broadcasting of electoral results declaring an early victory of Erdogan. So I'm repeating myself. We are talking about a regime in which the leaders set the game, determined the date, altered the rules, orchestrated the media, set and outnumbered many rivals, and ultimately won. And of course, the adjective competitive comes a lot of questions. I had to interpret the election results, but let's leave it to the Q&A section. And let me stop here. Now, there's time in which we, as the speakers, can reflect to each other's presentation. Roy, would you like to say a few things, or?
Just briefly, I mean, you went nicely through all the publications that were always, well, never ahead of what was happening, which is the fate of our discipline, right? And I remember one talk by Charles Khan, who also in 2018 already wrote that, well, the transition from competitive to full autocracy has just happened with the with the new political realities after the coup attempt, etc. But I mean, there's one specificity here. I mean, so you could ask, okay, so is this the power of autocratic leaders? So can autocratic leaders choose how to suppress the votes, how to organize and rig elections, etc.? And usually the image is that, well, I don't know, a president like Putin also has to do this because Putin is basically afraid of his population. Putin is afraid of his subject, and he would know that if he let things run without control from above, then maybe within a couple of months there would be too much opposition, too much disorder, etc., too many protests, and what have you. Also, I would say even now that with these logics in place for these past, I don't know, 13 years or so, Erdogan was never afraid of people in the street protesting him or so. Even, I mean, yes, Gezi in 2013, the protests were a challenge, but I think he knew that if the AKP and his people unleashed their own people in the streets, it would have been many more people protesting than those at Gezi. And so, and this threat and this capacity to mobilize people, which was then also obvious in, you know, these orchestrated demonstrations in the coup night, etc., where it was through the mosques that people mobilized pro-Erdogan rallies against the coup officers, etc. I think this has just stuck. So here's a president, or here's a movement in power that knows it can, yeah, unleash its people and mobilize enough. And I would say that's still specific, and that's still something where Turkey is specific, or where Erdogan is specific, not because he's a genius or so, because of Turkish nationalism, I don't know, this kind of mobilizing the people, representing the people, etc., which may not be there in the others, and also this kind of fusing religious identity and nationalist identity, which I think is stronger than in Russia also. So the question though will be: is this a Turkish thing, or is this just an autocratic thing? I would say it's rather a Turkish thing, and because the way the opposition was structured, and because of the ways that Turkish nationalism and Kemalism runs through all the camps, right? You have a reformulation of Turkish nationalism now, and it's so tricky to attack this because, well, all camps are filled with it, and it's tricky. It's what Kemalist liberals in Turkey do not want to hear is that it's almost impossible to develop an ideology which refers to Kemalism and which you can reframe now in a liberal democratic sense or so. So what progressives try to tell these Kemalist liberals and also the other Kemalists is, I don't know, get rid of that so that we may have, I don't know, new vision of representing ourselves and having new slogans and new ways to come together. And in Turkey, it's just tricky to for so many Turks to leave that Kemalist heritage behind or so. At least that would be my view. I mean, that's not a question out to you, but it would be interesting to see what you think of this, how this new form of nationalism runs through all the camps, and that also explains why Kılıçdaroğlu and his team thought, well, let's go after these votes and not try to mobilize in a different way with other more forward-looking slogans also.
Thank you. It is very important to recognize the peculiarities of our own cases, the Turkish case. But in general, I think it's important to underline this fragility of competitive authoritarianism, that it does not stay stable as it is. I mean, we have other cases like Russia, Venezuela, which moved towards more authoritarian cases, or Belarus even more. And Turkey is also shows symptoms of a even more autocratic, even more authoritarian tendency. It doesn't mean that Turkey is an electoral autocracy in which elections are just sham. It's only facade. There is some power, there is some contention, but definitely the competitive element is diminished heavily. That's what I think. When it comes, and yeah, you're right that Erdogan is quite popular compared to many autocratic leaders, but whether he fears from the streets, etc., I think GIGA is still quite important step in his way of governance. I mean, GIGA was the first real challenge to his rule, not CHP, Deniz Baykal era, etc., but GIGA itself. And after that, we see a tremendous effort to paramilitarize its society, its base, either via mafia groups or its own more ideological groups, etc. I think he had that fear, but now, speaking from the today, yeah, I mean, if some people are on the street, then Erdogan has the power to mobilize its own bases. But I think he had the fear. And it very much depends on how you want to look at it. On the one side, you can say he is very popular. He has this magnitude of this religious nationalist voters. But on the other hand, you could also say, although he mobilized all the state resources, the 50% did not submit or did not buy his arguments. It very much depends on how you look at it. But for me, I think the competitive element is highly diminished. What I would say, religion, conservatism, Turkish nationalism, I think they tell a lot about the voting behavior of Turkish society. But at the moment, as you said, we see a new phase of Turkish nationalism in which there are two things. First, Erdogan is like a chameleon, shifts its course from one point to another. I mean, it is the same guy who declared in 2013 the Kurdish opening process. And after 2 years, when he declares an independence war against Western imperialists and their Kurdish puppets, I say again, the same base supports him. Erdogan managed in one way selling his arguments, but also shifting his discourse from one point to another according to the changing circumstances. So if you look at after 20 years and said he always addressed the same religious and nationalist votes, perhaps the same people voted for him, but the content of this ideological premises changed from, I mean, like 180 degrees. And still there is a bond eventually that no one can deny between the leader and its base. That's quite important. The second thing that I would argue against more ideological explanations, I mean, instead of highlighting this conservatism, etc., is this post-truth politics he's playing. I mean, I also mentioned it again, that Erdogan, in one way or another, controls 90% of the media. People watch, I mean, last week not 2 weeks ago, I started watching I mean, my first Turkish historical drama, Alparslan, I resisted for quite a long time. But through these historical dramas, through all this news reporting, deep fake montages, etc., Erdogan creates a smoke screen. It's not about ideology. It is just creating some kind of common sense and letting people believe in that word, whatever is projected in that world. It is not about facts. It is not only about political lies, but creating a smoke screen in which the voters cannot see what is right and wrong, and Erdogan can make its maneuvers in that cloud. So it is, for me, it is not only about what he said, but also how he said the post-truth politics rather than the ideological premises. But eventually, of course, you're right, Erdogan is one of the popular autocratic leaders in the world. That would be also my comment to your presentation. I mean, is all about ideology, but also other things. And I think now we can open the floor for Q&A. I mean, Roy, you have the audience here. Probably you should run the Q&A section if you like.
I'm not sitting at the computer, but let's see
okay.
Who raises his or her hand via Zoom. I observe the physical room here in Tunis, and we may all observe the Zoom room out there. So feel free, people, to Ardahan. Please, Ardahan.
Hello, can you see me and hear me, or hear me at least?
We see something gray, but we hear you. So.
All right. Thank you very much, Roy. Thank you very much, Hakkı, for the presentations. I have a very short question, actually, to you, Roy. So before the elections, my feeling was, as someone resting upon political economy analysis, that because of the economic crisis Turkey is going through, Erdogan would have the most difficulties because of that, actually, like soaring inflation rates, unemployment raising, a currency crisis. But the results of the first round show actually that, we have seen the results. Erdogan didn't really mass support. So the question would be, and we see actually that nationalist vote in terms of a few parties rising. Would you, consider this in terms of like analytically, that actually the political economy explanations failed to make a proper analysis, and it was the identity based explanations that prevail here? I mean, I'm asking that as a political economy person too. So the question goes from one political economist to the other one. Thank you very much, Roy.
Okay, thank you, Ardahan. Maybe briefly. I mean, yes, I would say also, like, it became tougher and tougher to deduce from the, let's say, economic setting or from the political economic structure of Turkey and the crisis it's undergoing, to what the specific form that would be that people would be content with to, reflect this crisis, to overcome the crisis, or what have you. So now the question would be, okay, so is it then enough for, I don't know, businesses to erode and no trust being there in any sort of decision making or so, and everybody being in survival mode? So should that have led to getting rid of this government or so? I would say to have this reflection and to have this translation from economy to the political side, you would need something like free and fair elections or so. But then, of course, I don't know, you may have crisis settings where ideology becomes more relevant, but then also where individualized state-business relations also become more relevant. I mean, if corporate debt is high, then why risk this central government? Why risk something like fragmentation in politics, and why risk chaos after Arab? Because I mean, I don't know, most of the loans, most of those big loans, right, which are currently out there, have to get refinanced, etc. And in established interactions between those profiting right now, where the individual relation to Arab becomes more relevant, I mean, that at least is some sort of stability or so. Maybe people do not want going back to how fragmented banking and access to loans, etc., was back then. And the question is, do people still remember how weird it was back then to refinance yourself, etc., and then to stabilize the setting, etc.? I mean, so many people said, even in the business sphere, people are tired of Erdogan and would like to get rid of him. And then afterwards, they would like to live in a new setting. And then, you know, some may address the questions, okay, so why did you support this president for so long or so? But then again, do you really do it? So I guess they were more frightened at the end than, let's say, committed also. And those poor and unemployed and those undergoing crisis, yeah, again, like Hakkı said, all this energy from above to get 50%, 50 point something percent or so may not be that that success that the government thinks it was. But I would go with you. Yes, it should have been more. There should have been more. But maybe the picture is not so clear given this power that this figure can mobilize. So there's no direct reflection of that in votes. That's my, let's say, easiest or lamest response to that good question. I would not throw out political economy models at this point. Let's wait and see.
May I jump in?
Yes, but after that we have 2 hands from the Tunis audience.
Well, that's great. Okay, just quick, I'm not an expert on the political economy side, but when I listen to Turkish political economic experts first, they do not define the current condition as an economic crisis, literally, because the unemployment rates are actually shrinking in Turkey, unlike other macro identifiers. The second thing they raise is that although there is an economic downturn, the free fall of Turkish lira, high inflation, its effects differs from one region to another. I mean, the rural people in the rural areas are not as heavily affected by this inflation as the urban middle income or urban lower income people. Second thing. The third thing is that probably the Erdogan's electoral campaign, which was quite successful, he said, I mean, whenever Kılıçdaroğlu talked about the prices of the onion, he said it's not about onions, it's about independence. And people bought it, actually. And fourth is the electoral campaign of the opposition. Although they talk a lot about inflation, they neither announced their economic cabinet yet. They will probably do it tomorrow, if I am not mistaken. But till now, we did not know who was going to run the economic policies of the opposition if they came to power, and what kind of concrete projects they have to elevate the economic predicament at the moment. So the voters had the impression that if, okay, we know economy is bad and AKP is power, but if there is someone to fix it, it's again Erdogan. That had the impression, and the opposition failed to convince these voters. Okay, sorry, I stop here.
See, you are a political economy expert after all, so don't hide yourself in that. Okay, we start here in Tunis. What you may choose, Vanessa.
Yeah, so actually my question is about the diaspora and their role in the election. I mean, of course, it's quite diverse, and I don't know, maybe since strong German election, we can talk a little bit more about like how they voted, and maybe also like the diaspora, how did they influence, maybe also discourse, maybe living in countries where like freedom of expression is stronger executed than in Turkey. If we can find out about the role of diaspora also in this aspect.
Okay, I can start with that. I mean, that is the question that is vexing like Turkish-German audiences for many years now. So yes, so the question is, we do not know what kind of people do not vote in, let's call it, let's take the German case. So among the German Turks with a Turkish passport, so we don't know who does not go to vote. I mean, there's not enough data on that. There are some studies done at the University of Duisburg, Essen, where there is like preliminary analysis of German-Turkish voting behavior for the Turkish elections also. I would say, from my observations, is that people tend to stick to their family histories. So in the lamest way, I would say families who came as Gastarbeiter and were, I don't know, their descendants. I don't know. It's all about rising up socioeconomically, etc., to express yourself, to show yourself, to demonstrate what you can do, etc. These are less political. There also you will have more of the older ones keeping their Turkish passport, etc. And these votes, these are proper AK Party voters. For them, it's the president representing a transnational Turkey, a global Turkey, a powerful Turkey where you don't have to hide yourself, you don't have to hide your national, your religious identity, etc. If you talk about democracy with these people, for them, either they think it's democratic enough, based on that one side that of thinking about competition and the elections that Hakkı just mentioned. So for them, there are elections, it is democratic, so what do you want? Also, it's like showing a finger to the German majority audience, saying we can do whatever we want and we don't care about your sensitivities here. So the tricky thing is, of course, they don't show the finger to the German majoritarian audience, which has not lived, doesn't have to live with the outcomes of this, but of course they have to show it to Turkish compatriots in the motherland, in the old motherland, who have to suffer from that also. And I would say people who came more as political refugees in the 70s, 80s, etc. There you will have much more, let's say, pro-left, pro-socialist, pro-Kurdish, etc. activism also, and that reflects also in the way these people vote. I mean, but that's like my observation.
Percentages of the Gastarbeiter are more, I think.
Yes, I mean, so far. Let's see. I mean, if the pace keeps up like this, then the others will mobilize more in the future in Germany as well. Hakkı, what is your take on the German-Turkish vote?
Yeah, I am quite new into this topic of diasporas. I'm learning a lot. As far as I see, I mean, the Kurdish diaspora in Germany has its own dynamics, but as far as the Turkish diaspora is concerned, it comes from rural backgrounds. In Turkey, votes for Erdogan, support for Erdogan in rural regions is up to 60%. I mean, the overall national rate is less than 50%, but in rural areas, support for Erdogan is 60%. I mean, the Turkish diaspora in Germany comes from AKP's traditional voter base, and probably these patterns continue. The second thing is what I observe here in diaspora is identity politics, I mean, revolving around religion, sex, nationalism, is even stronger in diaspora. I mean, what I would call it tribal politics. I mean, there are different tribes. The Alawi tribe is there, the Kurdish tribe is there, the religious Sunni tribe is there. So as long as you live within that tribe and not much integrated into the German way of life, I mean, you naturally vote for a certain party, okay? But the other thing is, we talked a lot about democracy, etc. But if you are in that kind of world or lifestyle, AKP is, I mean, the authoritarian measures, etc., these are non-issue. Actually, in fact, you and your relatives can prosper in this kind of regime. It's problematic only if you are in the opposition or if you are not aligning for AKP. Otherwise, it's a heaven. and who needs democracy? I mean, if you are a Turk living in Germany, unless you are politically active, unless you have a very strong civil society life, what to do with democracy in Germany, actually? Okay, they do not care a lot about it. What we should understand is, I mean, in the Kemalist Turkey, this Western liberal democracy was the ideal for many Turks and Kurds. Okay, that was the ideal of Kemalism, to put Turkey at the level of the Western democracies. Yes. But nowadays, people from Turkey, either in Germany or in Turkey itself, have another dream. Okay, they dream of the Ottoman Empire. That's why I highlighted this historical dramas. It's so important. I mean, it's not about facts. It's not about idealism. It's more about fantasies. It's about your own world imaginations at the moment. It's not about Western democracies, but about this Ottoman might, imperial glory, giving the Western countries a lesson. And now people are supporting AKP and Erdogan because, at least in their imagination, AKP gave the lesson, the due treatment to the Western countries. This kind of attitudes are reverberating among the audience. And it is quite important to try to understand these people. When I first came to Germany in 2017, and at that time, Turkey had an election or referendum, etc., almost every year. Every year. Local election, general election, constitutional referendum. And whenever I talked to a German minister or some decision maker, they were always thinking, why do people keep voting for Erdogan? I mean, they think they could not understand this kind of support for Erdogan. Either these people are not intelligent enough or tricked, or they could not really make sense of it. And I think, I mean, that's what I said in 2018 election, and now I'm repeating now 5 years later again. We should try to understand the motivations, the understandings, the imaginations that are leading people to this kind of voting behavior. Thank you.
Julius.
Yeah, I've learned a lot as well. Thank you for your wonderful talk. Actually, Roy, you said that one element which was crucial for the which challenged the electoral hegemony was also the challenges within Erdogan's regional policy in the so-called Arab world. And being based in Tunisia, I was asking myself, where is the echo, for example, in Tunisia, when it comes to the Turkish elections? Yeah, when I came here to Tunisia in the midst of Arab Spring, Turkey was always a reference. Like, with not only from actors from political Islam, but also from other actors, like how to deal with a certain opening for democracy or others. In my observations, Turkey doesn't play a role anymore. It's not that obvious that you can find it in newspapers, etc. And maybe you could elaborate on that. So, is it one of those challenges you wanted to express with this argument, that this regional policy failed, that this alliance building processes, you have to bet on the wrong horse, which is called political Islam, in the Arab world is over now? Or is it more that like due to economic crisis in Tunisia, in other North African countries, as well as in Turkey, that there is a more self-centered approach and less regional approach from Turkey?
On the AK Party's, let's call it Arab policy also. I mean, you know, it was 11 years ago or 11 years ago where Erdogan made his tour. He was in Cairo, he was in Tunis. I don't remember if he also was in Libya. But I mean, from the reporting back then, you know, big pro-Erdogan rallies, and he was also voted in that year, not voted for, I mean, in the in polls across Arab countries, he was like the most inspiring political figure or leading political figure for the Arab populations or so. And that, of course, triggered him to really feel as if there were such a future of a renewed, Ottoman figuration also, of course, under leadership of Istanbul or Ankara. And that is what he sold. And that is what he was selling for years. And that is also how, when crisis after crisis came, that is how he legitimized his position for the Muslim Brotherhood after 2013. I think until now he's doing this four-finger sign in remembrance of the Rabaa massacre in 2013 or so. But I mean, Hakkı also referred to that. He has been able to shift his positions and things. And I mean, he was putting a lot of political weight onto that, into that story and into that promise. And that would be where Turkey could be really great and could not care anymore about what Europe demands from it, but embrace this regional future also. And you would assume that, well, with everything that you could not accomplish from back then, and there being this loss in status in the region, that this, I don't know, would cost something. I mean, this was also behind the policy of being able to use the Syrian refugees as an entry argument into occupying northern Syria to say, well, of course we decide what happens in Syria, even though it's an Arab country and we are Turkish, but for us this is perfectly a normal thing to do or so. And then you had the, I mean, what was very hurtful for him was how financially dependent Turkey became with regard to the Emirates and even Saudi Arabia or so. After 2017-18, you had the confrontation with the Saudi ruler over what's the name of the journalist who got butchered and murdered? I even forgot that name because so much happened. And then everything crumbles in that, but it has no effect on elections. I mean, and of course it doesn't resonate. It didn't really resonate back then. It was some rallies. It was some story making also, but of course nobody here wanted a new Turkish leadership over Arab countries also. This was all the way, this is only the way you could use Erdogan to do some pressure in Arab politics also. But again, this happened, you have to be very flexible in observing Turkish politics and its relations to the Arab countries. But you need this kind of media control so you don't have any electoral fallout from all these non-successes in these past 5 to 6 years or so. But yeah, that was basically the story I referred to. Hakkı, anything on that? Turkey and the Arab?
Was it Jamal Khashoggi you are referring to?
Yes.
Okay.
That was.
Okay. I mean, as far as the region is concerned, it has its own dynamics, especially since more boldly since 2020. This normalization, rapprochement at many different levels among the Arab countries, among Arab countries and Israel, among Arab countries and Turkey and Iran, and now with Syria in the Arab League. Apparently that trend will continue. I don't know how sustainable it is, but with these economic concerns, not only on Turkey, as you mentioned, but also on other parties like Egypt, there is a push towards normalization, and that will continue on the side of Turkey under the leadership of Erdogan. So this normalization, if Erdogan wins or the opposition wins, I mean, it will continue, but whether it will be in a more bureaucratic or personalistic fashion, that we will see, I mean, according to the outcome of this second round, actually. That's it.
All right. I do not know what time it is. I see no hand in Tunis. And I also do not see any hands in the Zoom audience. So I think we're done, Hakkı.
Okay, let me just say a few sentences. I mean, in general, it was both Roy's and my presentations were quite pessimistic in tone. But I should definitely highlight that the opposition had a big success. I mean, under all these conditions, the opposition got, I mean, Kılıçdaroğlu got 45%. That is huge. We only had this understanding, it sounds like a defeat or a win on the side of Erdogan, only because the opposition exaggerated its share. I mean, based on the polls or on the pulse of the streets, etc. But 45% an opposition candidate gets against all odds, against the lack of free media, against the lack of free judiciary, that is huge. And all the big cities, I mean, Istanbul, Ankara, Izmir, and many other big cities, in all of them, the opposition candidate, the Kılıçdaroğlu, got the majority, even at the slightest, it's a slight difference, but still he got the majority. So I think there is a huge success that should be noted and celebrated on behalf of the opposition. Of course, there is this second round on which it wouldn't be surprising if Erdogan gets the victory. But there will be a third round, which I would call as a third round. Next year, at the end of March, there will be the local elections. So the electoral pace will continue, and this back and forth between the government opposition will continue to so. All we have to do is to underline this unfair conditions Turkey has been facing. Thank you.
Thank you, Hakkı. Bye. Bye, Hakkı. See you next time.
Bye. All my best wishes to the friends in Tunis. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Cheers.